traditionally with Christianity, especially here where I am in the South, we have this antagonistic relationship between evangelical Christianity and Dungeons and Dragons and role playing. Is there
because they view it as a kind of exalting magic, which they think is sinful.
Does Islam, and it's extremely broadly, or the sections of Islam have that same kind of relationship with Dungeons and Dragons or role playing in general, or is it just something that it may not be something that really has come up?
It hasn't come up. I mean, look, I played role playing games. I played Dungeons and Dragons as a kid. And I was raised in a religious Muslim household. It's never an issue. I think it is a uniquely American evangelical issue. Look, in all of our traditions, evil magic, black magic is a bad thing, right? The Quran talks about it. The Quran acknowledges the existence of magic, that it's a real phenomenon in the universe. It's called sihr, which means magic, and it actually gives an origin story for magic. The Quranic story, and this is a fantasy story if you're not a believer, but that's a story, right? The Quranic story is that magic was first taught to human beings by two angels in ancient Babylon that were essentially fallen angels called Harut and Marut. Were very interesting figures, because Islam doesn't really have a concept of fallen angels. Christianity has angels that fell and rebelled against God and became demons. Right. Most Muslims would say that angels don't have any free will. Right. They are just almost robotically fulfilling God's will. So there's no free will to rebel, whereas the jinn, which are an invisible race between angel and human, does have free will. And the general Islamic position is that Satan was of the jinn, and that's why he could rebel against God, right? But he's not an angel. But in the Quran, there is a strange story of these two angels that are essentially teaching people black magic. And in the Quran, they're warning them, what we're teaching you is going to lead you to a bad outcome. And people are like, I don't care, I want it. And they give it to them. And there's all kinds of interesting Islamic legends about how these two angels actually did disobey God and then are trapped on earth. And essentially to survive on earth, they trade off their secret knowledge of the occult to human beings, right? And so that's an interesting story there. So that's the origin of magic. The Quran condemns very specific kind of magic, which we would call black magic, which it refers to that the angels Harut and Marut taught people the ability to actually create problems between people, like break up a husband and a wife. One of the old form of voodoo is, can you, the voodoo doll, can you make her break up with the guy I like, right? And that's a very common kind of modern magical thing. They putting a curse on somebody or trying to disrupt people's relationships for your own benefit, right? So that it talks about that and says that that's condemned. And the general Islamic position is that any kind of magic or sorcery is condemned. However, Islam is a very mystical tradition. Like I said, I'm a Sufi, which is an Islamic mystic. And so the idea that using various incantations of God's name or using what we do consider spell, like writing various Quranic verses in special ways and, almost like numerology, will actually give you the power over things because you're essentially going down to the energies of creation. And that sounds like magic to somebody who's like, well, but you're just happen to use the Quran to do it, but you're actually trying to change the material world. So Islam has had this much more flexible acceptance of mysticism, what we call magic, as part of our practical lives. My Sufi teachers in West Africa, they do all kinds of special blessings. I just got one in the mail. They said, here's a special thing, we're sending this blessing from West Africa, put it in the water, take a bath with it, and that will protect you and advance your things. That sounds like voodoo magic to somebody outside the tradition, but it is part of the Islamic culture. So because of that recognition, because we also have a belief in jinn as a reality, that these supernatural beings live amongst us and can do supernatural things in this world, that human people, it's not theoretical. Muslims believe, well, I can't find my car keys, the jinn must have taken it. It's a real thing, right? And my car keys have vanished. The jinn took it, right? I hope it returns it, right? So because of that acceptance of the supernatural and the mystical as part of our day-to-day lives in Islamic culture, we don't seem to have this thing of like Dungeons and Dragons is inherently, because I have a friend of mine, Christian friend, he took me to his church in Seattle, lovely experience there, that, he's a very devout Christian and he's an evangelical. And of course he's trying to convert me, and that's fine. He was doing his thing, but I went in and enjoyed his church and nice people there. And afterwards he got a little embarrassed because a woman came up to me and she wanted me to sign a petition, which was to ban Harry Potter from the local school. And he got kind of embarrassed because he's also a writer and artist, and he's also into the staff. And he was like a little embarrassed that his fellow church members were making this big deal about this book. And he said, "It's like, well, would you ban The Wizard of Oz?" He said that to his fellow, like, because he was trying to like cover his embarrassment that she had brought this to me, and he's like, well, the Wizard of Oz has witches in it. She's like, well, we should ban that too, right? And so that's a very specifically, I think, American evangelical phenomenon that comes out of Puritanism. This country was founded essentially, the earliest settlements were Puritan, right? And so that will always be the foundational bedrock of our culture, is the Pilgrims and the Puritans, who had very specific ideas of magic. And if you watch the movie, have you seen the movie The Witch?
Yes,
I love that movie.
I do like that. I do too. Yeah,
that explores when the American settlers are here in essentially the 1600s. This whole continent is magical. I mean, you're at night, you go to sleep, there's nobody around you for hundreds of miles except trees, and who knows what's in those woods, right? And so it leads to a belief into the supernatural. And in that movie, it turned out the supernatural is actually real, right? But you certainly come to understand why the Salem witch trials could happen in that environment, because the supernatural is this terrifying thing of a new continent where you don't know any of the rules, where there's animals you've never seen before, like turkeys that don't exist in Europe, and you don't know what else is in these woods, right? So the supernatural becomes real. So that's a uniquely American phenomenon. I don't think, Russia has a long tradition of a folklore around magic and magical traditions. I think the Russian Orthodox Church doesn't really like that, but it's still part of Russian popular culture today in 2022. So the church hasn't pushed it out of the system, whereas we do have this unique phenomenon of American evangelical culture, which takes this puritanical, literally, interpretation of magic, and any way of describing fantastical stories is seen as sinful and a threat. That's very specifically American.